One interesting thing we can do with contours on a topographic map is we can actually build a topographic profile to show what the landform or the topography or the terrain would look like from the side. So we've seen these maps before. These are map views of different areas that are using contours to represent changes in elevation. And we're looking at that, kind of looking as if we're looking straight down. We're representing the data for the change in elevation with contour lines, but some people might have a hard time visualizing what this looks like. However, if we took this and turned it 90 degrees, so we were looking at it from the side, like we're standing on the ground here and looking towards the landform here, then we would get, instead of a map view, we would get what we call a profile view. So profile views are kind of like cross sections, but they're only the top. They're only showing what the land would look like. And we're getting that information for what the land looks like from the contours on the topographic map. And you can see, just as we discussed before, we can see things about how, for example, this hill has a very uniform slope on both sides, because we can see as we move from east to west across here, the contours are all fairly evenly spaced. This one has 2 bumps on it. This one also has 2 bumps, but once again, we get to lower contour values in the middle, so there's more of a depression between these 2 hills here. And starting with a contour map, we can just build a topographic profile for any area that we choose. So how would we do this? So it would involve several different steps. The first step would be you would have to decide on what line you would like to see that topographic profile along. So think of this as where you're cutting into the earth so that you can look at it from the side. Once you've got your A to A prime line on there, then what you can do is take a separate blank piece of paper, lay it across here. Of course, you'll want to put on your beginning point A and your ending point A prime in this case. And then once you have that piece of paper there, every time you hit a brown contour line, you want to put a little tick on your piece of paper, and you want to label it with the contour values. I would also suggest putting a little tick where the highest point on the hill is. You can see you're going over a little hill here, you're going above 100 and then back down below 100. Wherever you think is the highest point right in the middle, you might put another little line there, put an H for hill. And every time you cross a stream, I definitely suggest putting a little squiggle on your piece of paper here and putting an S for stream, because that's where things are going to turn around. Once you've got all those elevation values from the contours on a piece of paper, then you can remove that piece of paper from the map and you can put it onto a graph, and then you can go, here's your value A, and it's at about an elevation of let's see, this would be 80, that would be 60, so about 70. So they put on a point here at 70, and then they just put on all these points wherever they hit an 80, a 100, another 100. There's the top of the hill. There's 80 again. Your blue squiggle would be where the stream is, and then you start climbing up to 80 again. These values are repeating. The 80 and 80 are repeating on both sides of the stream, and the 100 and 100 are repeating on both sides of the hill here. And then you just keep going up in this direction here. So this is how you would do it. And what you would end up with is a topographic profile. It would have the same scale, map scale, the distance on the map, as the distance. The profile would have the same distance in the horizontal sense as your map has in its scale. So in other words, if your profile is this long, it would be 1 mile long. And you can do this yourself. You're able to build your own topographic profile. You would need another piece of paper to do this. Lay the paper along here. You would put on a ticket at every contour. In this case, we're going from 700 to 800 between our index contours here. So each contour represents 20 feet. We can see that we have a high over here. We go down into a low valley. Even though this kind of looks kind of pointy, it's another high that we cross here. Then we go down into a low valley, and this is actually another high over here. So after we get out of this valley, we start climbing up, because we're not repeating, once again, any contours on this side. So this could be 700, 720, 740, 760, 780. Piece of paper along the bottom, along the contour, along the profile line, put all of those ticks on the piece of paper, and then you would move it down here. You would label elevation on this side, and the horizontal axis would be distance along the A to A prime line from your map.